I always knew something was off about her. The way she stared, the fake smile stretched across her face, the way she talked about rules like they were gospel, and she was God. But I never imagined that one day, HOA Karen would walk up to my porch, stare me in the eye, and cut off the only thing keeping my daughter alive. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. The sun was rising, the air smelled of wet grass, and inside, my daughter lay in her hospital bed, her fragile chest rising and falling in rhythm with the soft hum of her life support. And then silence. I thought maybe the power had gone out. I rushed to the machine, checked the wires, the plug. Nothing. I ran outside, barefoot, panicking, and there she was, Karen, with her little clipboard, standing smugly by the side of our circuit box, her hand still resting on the switch. Violation of neighborhood regulations, she said coldly, as if she hadn't just signed my daughter's death warrant. I screamed. My heart pounded. I called 911, but time was running out. And then just 10 minutes later, when everything felt lost, my daughter let out the most chilling sound I've ever heard. She screamed. I wasn't always this tired. There was a time not too long ago when I used to laugh without guilt and sleep without fear. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, peaceful, steady, and quiet. That all changed the day my daughter, Emily, was born. The doctors said her condition was rare, a severe neuromuscular disorder that left her unable to breathe on her own. I still remember the way the world dimmed around me when the words fell from the doctor's lips, as if time itself had paused just long enough to steal every ounce of joy from my chest. But then I saw her, tiny, fragile, fighting. Even with tubes down her throat and machines surrounding her like metal guardians, she looked at me with wide, curious eyes that said one thing: I'm still here, Mom. That's all I needed. From that moment on, I became a different person. My world narrowed down to hospital corridors, medication charts, and the gentle beep of monitors. We spent the first 7 months of her life inside those walls. Emily had a tracheostomy and a feeding tube. She couldn't cry the way other babies did. Her body didn't allow it. But she smiled. Oh, how she smiled! With every blink and every twitch of her tiny fingers, she taught me how to be strong, stronger than I ever thought I could be. The nurses became our family. They nicknamed her Little Warrior. She had that effect on people. Even the gruffest night shift nurse would pause to stroke her hair or sing her a lullaby when they thought no one was looking. Dr. Jensen, our lead pulmonologist, once said, I've never seen someone so fragile be so determined to live. Eventually, the doctors agreed she could go home, with conditions. A full home care setup was required. Oxygen concentrators, suction machines, a backup generator, and 24/7 monitoring. I didn't hesitate. I sold my car, borrowed against my mother's pension, and cleared out my savings. I transformed our living room into a miniature ICU. The hum of machines replaced TV chatter. The scent of antiseptics replaced lavender candles. But for the first time, Emily could sleep near me in her own home, with the soft warmth of her favorite stuffed bear tucked by her side. I moved us into a quiet suburban neighborhood to be closer to the specialized medical transport team and therapists. I chose this neighborhood for its calm streets and proximity to the children's hospital, not for the HOA. I didn't even understand what an HOA really was until I received my first letter from them 2 weeks after moving in. It was a pale blue envelope, too cheerful for what was inside. A formal notice stating that external medical devices and visible wiring on residential property are in violation of community aesthetics. At first, I laughed. Surely this was a mistake. I walked over to the HOA office to explain our situation. That's when I met her, Karen. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a lifestyle magazine, blonde bob, pastel sweater, pearls, even at noon. Her smile was more condescending than kind, her eyes cold. I introduced myself, told her about Emily, and explained the purpose of the medical setup outside our home, mostly backup systems and generator vents. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't listening. We have rules for a reason, she said flatly. If we let you make exceptions, everyone will want to. I was stunned. This wasn't about convenience or preference. This was about survival. I thought maybe she just didn't understand, so I wrote a letter, attached Emily's medical documents, and even invited her to meet Emily. She never responded. Over the next few weeks, the tension grew. I started finding anonymous notes taped to our door. This is not a hospital. You're lowering property value. Take your junk inside. At night, I would hear footsteps outside, but by the time I opened the door, no one would be there. One afternoon, as I was helping Emily with her therapy stretches by the window, I saw Karen standing across the street, arms folded, staring. She didn't look away when I caught her gaze. Despite everything, I tried to maintain peace. I didn't want Emily exposed to negativity. She was 5 now, still nonverbal, still fragile, but sharp as ever. Her eyes lit up when she saw birds, her fingers curled around mine when she wanted comfort, and she'd smile wide when I read her favorite story about the brave lion who found his roar. Her condition was still considered critical, but stable. The machines had become part of her daily rhythm, and thanks to home therapy, she had started using her hands to express basic emotions. Every little progress felt like a miracle. I thought we were okay. I thought the worst was behind us. But Karen had other plans. She began complaining more aggressively to the HOA board, to other neighbors, even once to Child Protective Services, claiming I was abusing the HOA policy to gain sympathy. Luckily, CPS dismissed it right away after visiting and seeing the spotless care I provided for Emily. But the seed had been planted. Karen had made us the enemy of the neighborhood. Still, I clung to hope. The hospital staff continued to support us from a distance, doing home checkups, reviewing her vitals remotely. One nurse, Amy, even baked cookies on weekends for Emily and decorated her medical equipment with soft colors and cartoon stickers. These small things kept me going. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Karen's behavior had escalated from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. One morning, our generator's wiring was mysteriously found cut. I reported it to the police, but there was no proof of who did it. When I confronted Karen, she just smirked and said, "Maybe your daughter belongs somewhere more equipped." That sentence stayed with me. It echoed in my head whenever I lay awake at night, watching Emily's chest rise and fall. I'd realized then that we were living beside a woman who didn't see Emily as a child. She saw her as an inconvenience, a problem to be removed. I tightened our security, installed a camera, warned the nurses and therapists, but deep down, I knew something darker was brewing, and despite all my preparations, nothing could have prepared me for the day she made her move. Not with words, not with letters, but with a flip of a switch that nearly ended everything. At first, it was just notes in the mailbox, small, typed messages folded in crisp white envelopes with no signature. The first one read, "Your equipment is an eyesore. This is a neighborhood, not a hospital." I crumpled it and threw it away, assuming it came from a neighbor who didn't understand our situation. But as the weeks passed, the notes became more frequent and the tone sharper. "This is your second warning. We are watching. Fix this before it's fixed for you." I tried to stay calm. I had followed every rule, obtained every permit. Before moving in, I had gone through a tedious legal process to ensure Emily's life support setup could be safely and permanently installed at home. The electrical work had been inspected and approved. The generator was certified for medical use and mounted in a corner of the backyard that was both accessible and discreet. We even consulted with an HOA representative at the time, though I now suspect that detail had somehow been buried under Karen's authority later. Everything was legal. Everything was in place. But legality doesn't protect you from hate wrapped in bureaucracy. Karen's name wasn't on the first few warnings from the HOA, but her fingerprints were all over them. The phrasing, the formal passive aggression, the way each letter referenced bylaws I knew she loved to quote, it was her voice, even if it came from behind the HOA's letterhead. I wrote back to the HOA board, submitting Emily's medical records again, reiterating the approvals we had in place. For a while, things went quiet. I dared to breathe. Then, one morning, I found our trash cans flipped over, their contents spilled across the driveway. A single note lay on top of the mess. "Maybe you belong in a place for sick people." I stood frozen, The wind, lifting the paper slightly, like it too, was unsure whether to flee or fight. Emily was inside, just waking up, her monitors chirping softly with her breath. I looked back at our small home, once a sanctuary, now a battlefield. I cleaned up quickly, not wanting her to see. That became a pattern. Every act of cruelty was followed by me scrambling to protect her from it. A dead plant left at our porch. Screws placed under my car tires. The doorbell ringing at midnight only to find no one there. Sometimes I thought I was going crazy until I checked the security camera footage. There she was, Karen, walking past, pausing, glancing at our house like it was an infection. She never touched anything directly. She wasn't stupid, but her presence was everywhere. One afternoon, I received a formal HOA violation notice stating that external medical equipment was creating an unsightly appearance and decreasing neighborhood property values. This time, the letter was signed by Karen, full name, full authority. I called the number listed and requested an urgent board meeting. They agreed, reluctantly. When I walked into that meeting room, I felt like I was stepping into a trial rather than a discussion. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 other board members. I presented every document I had: hospital referrals, municipal permits, photographs of the discrete setup, letters from Emily's doctors. Karen barely looked at them. Instead, she focused on the aesthetics. "This neighborhood has standards," she said smoothly. "We simply cannot allow visible equipment that breaks the visual harmony." I wanted to scream. My daughter's life wasn't disharmony. It wasn't clutter. But when I said as much, she shrugged. "I'm sorry for your situation, truly," she said, voice devoid of emotion. "But individual hardship doesn't override community standards." The board didn't revoke my rights to the equipment, but they didn't protect them either. They passed the issue back to me, stating that I needed to work with the board to find a more agreeable visual solution. What did that even mean? Paint the generator beige? Build a box around the oxygen tubes? I left the meeting feeling more alone than I ever had. And after that day, Karen's campaign of control intensified. She started showing up outside during Emily's ambulance check-ins, arms folded, watching as EMTs wheeled in new supplies. One time, she took pictures of the stretcher, the nurses, even Emily's face through the window. I chased her off my lawn, voice shaking with rage, but she just smirked and said, "I'm documenting violations." The next day, I received another letter: unauthorized activity involving commercial-grade vehicles on residential property. They were referring to the ambulance. An ambulance. Then came the power threats. At first, she claimed the external wiring was a fire hazard. An inspection was done, everything passed. Then she claimed the generator's noise was disruptive. We installed sound insulation. Still, she persisted. When that didn't work, she started warning us of penalties for noncompliance. I felt like I was walking through a minefield, never knowing which step would trigger the next attack. I called the city. I called a lawyer. I even tried to move, looked into transferring Emily to a care facility, but the waiting list was months long, and I couldn't afford it. We were stuck, trapped in a neighborhood where our existence was treated like vandalism. Then something truly terrifying happened. One morning, Emily's pulse oximeter dropped unexpectedly. I rushed to check the oxygen concentrator and found it unplugged. Not disconnected, but unplugged. Someone had entered the backyard and tampered with it. The gate lock had been snapped. I called the police. They filed a report, but had no leads. I submitted the security footage, but the person had worn a hood, their face obscured. I showed the clip to Karen during our next HOA meeting. "How convenient," she said coldly. "You should consider better locks." That night, I sat by Emily's bed with a baseball bat and tears in my eyes. She slept peacefully, unaware of the war being fought around her. The next day, a new violation notice appeared. This time, it included a fine, $500 for non-compliant backyard equipment. I called the HOA's legal line, furious, but no one answered. Karen had learned how to manipulate the system, how to wear down her target not with weapons, but with rules, restrictions, and silence. I tried reaching out to neighbors. Some were sympathetic, but scared. Others whispered apologies and closed their doors. Karen's influence stretched far. I started documenting everything: dates, times, letters, photos. I built a folder on my computer labeled Survival. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it made me feel like I had some control. Still, every day I woke up with dread. Would this be the day she crossed the line? Would this be the moment she took her obsession with order and used it to commit a cruelty that couldn't be undone? And then, one warm spring morning, that line was crossed. The air had that strange, humid stillness before something goes terribly wrong. I was in the kitchen preparing Emily's medication when suddenly the house went silent, too silent. No hum, no beep, no mechanical rhythm. I froze. The power was out, but only for us. I checked the main panel. The switch had been flipped externally. I ran outside, and that's when I saw her, Karen, standing by the utility box, clipboard in one hand, the other resting casually by the lever she had just pulled. "You've been warned enough," she said. "Maybe this will finally teach you to comply." And just like that, Emily's life was hanging by a thread, and I was racing against the clock to stop it from snapping. It happened in an instant, though it felt like time warped around me, slowing to a crawl, stretching out each second like a thread about to snap. I was in the kitchen, no more than 10 feet away from Emily's room, crushing her morning dose of medication between two spoons. The hum of machines was our usual background music, the soft whir of the oxygen concentrator, the gentle click of the pulse monitor, the rhythmic mechanical inhale-exhale of the ventilator. I didn't even realize how deeply those sounds had embedded themselves in me, how their constant presence was a lifeline, not only for Emily, but for my own sanity. And then, suddenly silence. No warning, no flicker, just silence, deep, thick, unholy. The kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even catches up. I dropped the spoons. They clattered on the tile floor, but the sound barely registered. My legs moved before my thoughts did. I sprinted into the living room where Emily lay in her hospital bed, her tiny chest still, and the ventilator dead. The machine screen was black. No lights, no numbers, just a blank void where life used to pulse. "Emily!" I screamed, my voice shrill and cracking, but she didn't respond. Her lips were already paling, her face turning the soft shade of porcelain that no mother should ever see on her child while they're still alive. I reached for the manual resuscitator bag, hands shaking, heart pounding so loud it blurred the edges of my vision. I began squeezing air into her lungs over and over again, counting each breath as tears burned my cheeks. "Stay with me, baby. Please just stay." I was dialing 911 with one hand, trying to explain the unexplainable to the dispatcher. "Someone cut the power. My daughter's on a ventilator. She's not breathing. Please hurry," while praying that backup systems would kick in. But they didn't. The emergency battery that should have given us 10 extra minutes had also been tampered with. It was useless, dead like the rest. I ran outside barefoot, and that's when I saw her, Karen, still standing by the utility panel, a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other. She looked at me, unflinching, and said coldly, "You've been given enough chances. Noncompliance has consequences." I didn't hear the rest. I didn't even remember running past her, yanking the box open, flipping the switch back up with such force that I scraped the skin off my fingers. The power surged back in, too late. The ventilator rebooted, beeping wildly, confused by the sudden loss and return of electricity. Emily lay there, motionless, her chest not moving, the color fading fast from her cheeks. I collapsed beside her, pressing my forehead to hers, sobbing as I kept pumping air into her lungs. Every second was an eternity. I whispered her name between panicked breaths. "Please, baby. Please, please don't go." 2 minutes. 5 minutes. 7. The ambulance hadn't arrived. I had done everything right, bought the machines, secured the permits, built the life she needed, and still, somehow, a single human's hatred had undone it all in a matter of seconds. That was the cruelest part. Not the power outage, not the broken generator, but the knowledge that this wasn't an accident. It was intentional. That someone could be so blinded by their obsession with rules that they'd play God with a child's life. And there I was, powerless, watching my daughter slip away. By minute 9, my arms were numb, and I couldn't tell if it was from the strain or the fear. Emily's fingers had gone cold. Her little mouth was parted, her eyes half-lidded. The machine was on again, pumping air automatically now, but there was no movement in her chest. Nothing. No flicker. No response. And then, minute 10, I leaned in, whispered one last plea into her ear, and that's when it happened. A sound. Not mechanical. Not digital. A raw, human sound that sliced through the room like lightning cracking open a silent sky. Emily screamed. Not a loud, clear scream. Her body wasn't strong enough for that, but a strained, choked, primal wail that came from somewhere deep inside her. Her eyes flew open wide. Her back arched. Her hands clawed at the blankets. It wasn't pain, it was terror. It was life fighting to return to a body it had almost left behind. And in that moment, everything shattered. I screamed too, dropping to my knees beside her, clutching her close, as if I could hold her soul in place with my arms alone. I didn't care about the machines or the HOA or Karen standing outside watching. My baby was breathing. My baby was alive. The EMTs arrived moments later, the house filling with motion and voices and questions. But all I could hear was Emily, still weak, still fragile, but alive and breathing. For 10 agonizing minutes, the world held its breath. I watched my daughter's chest remain still, her eyes half open in a way that no child's eyes should ever be. Her body felt like wax under my trembling hands, cold, fragile, fading. I couldn't tell if I was still breathing. I don't even know how I kept moving, squeezing the resuscitator bag, whispering prayers I didn't even know I remembered, pleading with God, the universe, fate, anything. Emily, my Emily, the girl who once smiled at clouds and clutched my finger like it was her entire world, now lay motionless, like a candle burning on its last flicker. The house around us was quiet, yet loud in all the wrong ways, the beeping of machines, the echo of my cries, the distant wail of a siren that felt too far away. Outside, the sky had turned an eerie shade of gray, heavy and indifferent, while inside, time seemed to stretch, bend, and twist cruelly. I couldn't stop the voice in my head repeating, "She's gone. She's gone. She's gone." And then, like lightning splitting the silence, it happened. Emily screamed. A hoarse, raw, animalistic cry, so full of pain, of fear, of life, that it sent a bolt of shock through my entire body. It wasn't just sound, it was resurrection. It was a soul that refused to leave. Her back arched, her hands twitched, her mouth opened wide, and from somewhere deep within her, the sound tore through the house. It wasn't the sound of a child in pain, it was the sound of a child returning. My eyes flooded again, but this time with something else. Hope. Terrified, breathless hope. Emily. Baby, I'm here, I'm here. I sobbed, dropping the bag as I wrapped my arms around her shaking form. Her fingers clutched the blanket, her legs kicked weakly. The machine screamed with her, oxygen surging, heart rate rising, monitors lighting up with the evidence of life. She wasn't just alive, she was fighting. A neighbor must have heard her scream, maybe the same one who had always left a soft toy on our porch every Christmas. Because moments later, I heard the front door burst open, followed by the thunder of heavy boots. EMT, someone shouted, "Where's the patient?" I couldn't speak, I just pointed. They rushed in with equipment, barked instructions, hooked her up again. There were voices, hands, oxygen masks, readings, words I didn't fully register. She's stable, pulse returning, prepare transport. But the only thing I saw was Emily's eyes. Wide, glassy, alive. Karen was gone by then, disappeared, vanished like a shadow at sunrise. Cowards don't wait to see the aftermath of their cruelty. But I didn't care anymore. At that moment, all I cared about was the miracle that had just unfolded on our living room floor. My daughter, my sweet, brave, broken-bodied warrior, had been dragged to the edge of death and refused to let go. She came back. She screamed her way back. And nothing in the world would ever silence her again. The aftermath felt surreal, like walking through the ashes of a life that had nearly burned to the ground. Emily was rushed to the hospital, her body still trembling from the trauma. The doctors said it was a miracle she had survived, that another minute of oxygen deprivation might have caused irreversible brain damage. But somehow, miraculously, she was okay. Not untouched, but unbroken. I sat by her side for days, holding her hand as she recovered, watching her slowly return to the quiet rhythm of survival that had always defined her life. But even as I thanked every higher power for giving her back to me, a new fire had ignited in my chest, fueled not by fear, but by fury. What Karen had done wasn't just cruel. It was criminal, and I was going to make sure she didn't get away with it. At first, she tried to play innocent. When the police came to question her, after reviewing the utility box tampering, the previous complaints, and the footage of her loitering near our house, she told them she was simply checking for neighborhood violations. She said the panel must have been defective, that maybe I had forgotten to plug the system in myself. She played the role of the polite suburban enforcer, masking her malice behind a smile and a string of legal-sounding nonsense. But the truth was on tape. My home security camera had captured her standing by the box moments before the power went out. And though the footage wasn't crystal clear, the timing matched exactly. The 911 call logs, the machine reboot logs, even the medical report from the paramedics, all of it lined up with the moment she pulled that switch. The district attorney took the case seriously after seeing Emily's hospital report. What might have been brushed off as a petty neighbor dispute was now a case of reckless endangerment, willful interference with life-sustaining medical equipment, and attempted manslaughter. Karen was arrested in front of her prim, white townhouse 2 weeks later, and for the first time since we moved in, I felt like the world was tilting back toward justice. Her expression as she was placed in handcuffs wasn't shock, it was rage, like she couldn't believe someone like me had the nerve to fight back. The courtroom was packed on the day of her arraignment. Reporters stood outside, cameras flashing. The story had gone viral. HOA Karen cuts power to disabled child's life support system blazed across headlines and news tickers. People were outraged. Letters poured in from strangers across the country offering support, medical donations, even legal aid. A petition demanding Karen's removal from the HOA board gathered over 100,000 signatures in a matter of days. Neighbors who had once turned away in silence now spoke up, admitting they'd been afraid to challenge her before. One elderly couple even testified that she had bullied them into selling their home years ago because their garden wasn't up to code. In court, Karen sat stiffly in her designer suit, flanked by expensive attorneys who tried to paint her as misunderstood, stressed, concerned for neighborhood safety. They argued that she didn't mean to cut the power, that it was a mistake fueled by confusion over improper installations. But the prosecutor stood firm, laying out every warning, every notice, every escalation she had made. And then they played the 911 call. My voice, broken and panicked, pleading for help. Then the moment that shattered the courtroom, they played the audio of Emily's scream. That one hoarse, soul-tearing cry that had pulled her back from death. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Karen looked down. Some jurors wiped tears. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and a gaze like cold steel, delivered a verdict that felt like a prayer answered. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts: criminal negligence, willful interference with medical equipment, and attempted involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with no parole before 4. The judge's final words stayed with me long after the gavel fell. He looked directly at her and said, "Rules are not meant to override humanity. When you prioritized cosmetic uniformity over a child's right to live, you lost more than your freedom, you lost your soul." The HOA was disbanded within a month. The state launched a review into HOA powers and emergency medical exemptions. A new law was proposed, Emily's Law, that would prohibit any homeowners association from interfering with life-saving medical equipment on private property. I testified before the state legislature with Emily sitting quietly beside me in her wheelchair, clutching her lion plush toy. When I finished, the chamber stood in a silent, unanimous applause. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. As for our lives, nothing was ever the same, but not in the way I expected. The neighborhood became warmer, more human. People brought food. Strangers sent cards. One of the neighbors helped me build a beautiful, sheltered enclosure for Emily's equipment, painted with sunflowers and butterflies. A local artist donated her time. Kids from the neighborhood came and painted handprints on it with Emily. It wasn't just equipment anymore. It was a symbol of survival, of kindness, of the power of standing up even when your knees shake. I still wake up sometimes to check if the machines are humming. The trauma doesn't leave overnight. But now, when I hear that soft mechanical breathing, I feel peace instead of fear. Emily smiles more now. Her therapists say she's made more progress in 2 months than in the last year. I don't know what she remembers from that day. Maybe nothing, or maybe everything. But when she reaches out her little hand and grabs mine, holding it like an anchor, I know she remembers one thing for sure, that I stayed, that I fought, that I never stopped, and neither did she. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, like morning light slipping between the blinds after a long, harrowing night. After everything we'd endured, Emily's scream that day wasn't just a return of breath. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Her recovery was not easy, but every tiny movement felt monumental. The way her fingers curled again around her favorite stuffed lion, the soft flutter of her eyelashes when I spoke her name, the hint of a smile as music played softly in her room. All of it reminded me that life, even when bruised and battered, has the power to rebuild. She began responding more actively in therapy, and though her voice was still weak, her eyes spoke volumes. Her spirit hadn't been broken. It had survived. It had won. With every passing day, we left behind the shadows of that near tragedy and moved toward something resembling peace. We didn't stay in that house. I knew I could never again let Emily sleep beneath a roof where her safety had once been ripped away by cruelty in the name of rules. So, we moved to a quieter town, far from HOA regulations and Karen's ghost. The new house isn't perfect, no manicured lawns or strict bylaws, but it's full of trees, birdsong, and neighbors who wave with kindness, not suspicion. We installed Emily's equipment with full community support, and for the first time in a long time, I exhaled without fear. The hum of her machine still fills the rooms, but now it's a lullaby, not a warning. At night, I sit beside her bed, watching her sleep peacefully, her cheeks pink with life, and I marvel at the journey we've endured together. Not many people can say they've held life in their hands and nearly watched it slip away, only to witness it come back stronger, screaming, demanding to be heard. Looking back, I no longer see that day, only as the moment Karen tried to take everything from us. I see it as the moment Emily proved what I had always known. She was stronger than hate, than injustice, than any rule scribbled on a piece of paper. She is the very embodiment of grace under fire, of hope refusing to die. And as her mother, I've learned that strength isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's soft, steady, and built from sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and love that refuses to give up. Our story isn't just about survival. It's about standing up for life, for truth, for the ones who cannot speak for themselves. If there's one message I hope the world carries from our pain, it's this: never let anyone's idea of order silence your love, your fight, or your voice. Because sometimes the quietest soul has the loudest scream, and that scream can change everything. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep inside your heart, don't let it end here. Share Emily's fight, not just because it's heartbreaking, but because it's real. Because right now, there are countless families silently battling the same cruelty, wrapped in rules and regulations that forget the value of human life. No parent should ever have to plead for the right to keep their child alive. No child should have to scream to prove they deserve a chance. This isn't just one story, it's a mirror of so many others. So please, if you believe that humanity should always come before policy, and that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, then like this video, comment, hope, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Join us here on the HOA Stories, where we expose the truth behind neighborhood injustices and give a voice to the unheard. Your support isn't just a click, it's a stand for compassion, for justice, for change. Subscribe, stay tuned, and let's make sure that no one ever has to face what Emily did alone.